Hello and welcome to MTG Insider, your one-stop shop for announcements, rumors, financial news, and competitive coverage of all things Magic the Gathering. I'm your host, Mystery MTG Damien, and let's jump right in and see what's happening on the tournament tables. While the Pioneer Regional Championship season is now upon us, and the community has already begun digging into the format in an attempt to distill it into only the finest Tier 1 decks, first, we must turn our attention to the upcoming Magic Pro Tour this weekend at MagicCon Minneapolis, featuring March of the Machine Draft and Standard Constructed. Now, Standard has been the focus of many competitive players over the past few months, while it was the main format of the previous regional championship season. There were over 2,700 players competing in those Standard regional championship tournaments, so there is a ton of data to pore over. As usual, let's begin by establishing a big picture view of the format leading up to this weekend's Pro Tour, and then take a closer look at which decks are thriving and which ones are merely surviving in the Standard metagame by looking at their metagame share and match win rates. Finally, we'll look at some of the changes these decks may undergo with the release of the latest set, March of the Machine, and how it may impact things even further. Let's jump in. The first deck on our list is, of course, Grixis Midrange. Now, following the last Standard rotation, Grixis quickly established itself as having the best core to build around in Standard, with the overpowered 2-mana Bloodtithe Harvester curving into excellent card advantage engines like Corpse Appraiser and Fable of the Mirror Breaker, allowing the deck to find and cast finishers like Shoulder the Apocalypse and Invoke Despair to just end the game. It was unsurprisingly the most played deck in the previous season of regional championships, making up just over 20% of the metagame. Being in 3 of the most powerful colors in Standard allows the deck to adapt and pivot easily in order to shore up weak matchups or get an edge in the mirror, as we saw early in the season when Grixis quickly established itself as the deck to beat, leading players to pack their decks with Reckoner Bankbusters, main deck Negates and Duresses, as well as Blade Coil Serpent on the top end to finish the game. When low-curve creature-based aggro decks began to emerge like Blue-White Soldiers and Green-White Toxic, the Grixis list turned to additional cheap removal in Cut Down and the efficient sweeper Brotherhood's End to keep them in check. A turning point came when mono-white mid-range decks started packing 8 land destruction effects in the main deck in the form of Field of Ruin and Demolition Field in order to punish the greedy 3-color mana bases of decks like Grixis and Esper. This led many Grixis players to eschew blue altogether and settle into the smoother mana provided by the 2-color Rakdos decks, leading to a drop in popularity in Grixis toward the end of the last regional championship season. Now, will new March of the Machine cards like Chandra Hope's Beacon help Grixis claw back up to the top of Standard? Or perhaps a new combo-based version of the deck featuring Hidetsugu and Kairi being sacrificed to cast Breach of the Multiverse will emerge victorious? We'll find out this weekend. The next deck on our list is, of course, Esper Legends. Now, despite Esper Legends being an existing archetype at the start of the season, it looked very different than it does now, and it was considered by most to be a Tier 1.5 or Tier 2 deck. That is, until the printing of Skrelv Defector Might in Phyrexia All Will Be One. Suddenly, the most powerful and hard to interact with curve in Standard became turn 1 Skrelv Defector Might into turn 2 Thalia Guardian of Thraben or Denic Pious Apprentice into turn 3 Rafine Scheming Seer into Shoulder the Apocalypse, taking Esper Legends from around 7% of the field to a whopping 18% with a 55% win rate, the highest in Standard by the end of the season. The mana is a work of art centered around Plaza of Heroes, which is not only an untapped 3-color land when casting all of your legendary creatures, but also acts as a powerful spell in the late game to protect them. The high number of legends in the deck also allows the deck to maximize the power of the channel lands from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, often reducing their cost to just 1 or 2 mana, while also not being taxed by the very powerful Thalia Guardian of Thraben in the deck. This allows the deck to play up to 28 lands, which would normally be unthinkable for a proactive creature deck, but Esper manages to pull it off, since up to 12 of your lands are like spells. One potential new addition to the deck from March of the Machine is Rona, Herald of Invasion, which gums up the ground early against aggro, works well with Tolu's Clever Conductor or the Raven Man, then transforms into a late-game powerhouse. Some exciting new additions for the sideboard include Surge of Salvation, a cheap 1-mana counter for board sweepers and Invoke Despair, as well as Invasion of Gobakan to interfere with opposing decks looking to resolve large, expensive spells like Cruelty of Grix and Atraxa Grand Unifier. We will see if the best deck in Standard can continue to defend its title this weekend. Our next deck is Mono White Midrange, making up just over 11% of the regional championship metagame. This deck plays almost like a control deck, and is certainly the most consistent deck in Standard, with a simple, one-color mana base, allowing it to play a hyper-efficient removal spell like Lay Down Arms to deal with early threats, as well as a bevy of colorless lands to either grind your opponent into dust with card advantage from Roadside Reliquary, coming back via Serra Paragon, or proactively attack their greedy mana bases with Field of Ruin and Demolition Field. While this gave it a favorable matchup against the most popular deck in the format, Grixis, the mono-white deck can struggle to close the game once it's stabilized, as its only win conditions are pretty slow and not very resilient. This led to it being a deck that often went to time in live matches, resulting in many draws, and putting its win rate a full 5% behind Esper Legends and Rakdos Midrange at the top of the list. Spicy potential additions from March of the Machine include Guardian of Girapur to get additional value from all the ETB or Enter the Battlefield effects in the deck, or Sunfall as a way to not only control the board but also provide a much needed way to apply pressure and close those games. As with Esper Legends, a card like Surge of Salvation in the sideboard is an auto-include for all the reasons mentioned previously. Will going back to land destruction be the path to victory for Mono White? Or will playing a solid control game be enough for the deck to see success? We'll have to wait and see. Our next deck is the perennial Mono Red Aggro. While making up just 6.6% of the metagame at the regional championships, placing it 5th overall, Mono Red suffered from a 48.6% win rate against the field. Now, while this was mostly due to repeatedly facing cards like Format Staple and aggro deck Kryptonite Shouldered the Apocalypse, things are starting to look up for decks running all mountains. Red was arguably the biggest winner in March of the Machine, with many new, powerful tools being added to the aggressive deck's repertoire. Invasion of Regatha and Bloodfeather Phoenix seem like the best new proactive cards to slot into the deck, as well as powerful 2-drops like Kenra Spellspear to put in damage early and then flip into a scary, resilient threat in the mid-game. With Nahiri's Warcrafting as a new way to not only deal with opposing Shouldrids, but also provide card advantage when clearing away smaller creatures, and efficient new sideboard cards like Lithomantic Barrage to cheaply remove high-toughness threats like Rafine Scheming Seer, Mono Red Aggro could easily crush the tournament if players skimp on sideboard cards to shore up their defenses and life totals. After not being taken very seriously in Standard for as long as it has, this weekend might be Mono Red's time to shine. The next entry on our list is Rakdos Reanimator, a relatively recent entry to Standard. Rakdos Reanimator was one of the best performing decks toward the end of the regional championship season, despite only comprising about 5.2% of the metagame, with 2 players taking copies of the deck to a first and second place finish at the last large regional championship in San Diego. The deck aims to use Fable of the Mirror Breaker or blood tokens from Bloodtithe Harvester to discard Atraxa Grand Unifier, get it in the graveyard in order to cheat it into play as early as turn 4 with Cruelty of Grix's 3rd chapter. Now, this strategy is obviously very powerful and can go over the top of any other deck, but it is also vulnerable to both counter magic and graveyard hate. However, when the Grixis decks are dropping blue from their mana base to be better against the land destruction from Mono White, and no other top decks are playing Make Disappear, Negate, or Disdainful Stroke in their 75, the Rakdos Reanimator deck is free to get away with putting 7 mana Haymakers into play at will. As if putting a 7/7 Flying Vigilance Deathtouch Lifelink Angel that draws you 4 to 5 cards into play wasn't enough, the deck also got a powerful new finisher in Etali Primal Conqueror to cheat onto the battlefield. Etali is preferable in situations where Rakdos pilots need to establish board presence quickly, as Etali allows you to not only find powerful cards when it resolves, but also cast them for free. This is in contrast to the many games where falling too far behind on the board meant that even an Atraxa couldn't save you, since the opponent would simply kill it or bounce it on their turn and then swing for lethal. While certainly a mix of both of these huge 7-drops is probably the sweet spot, finding the right numbers can be a little tricky. Will other players respect the Rakdos Reanimator decks and bring some sideboard graveyard hate? Will Counter Magic see more play than it has been in order to keep this deck in check? All will be revealed this weekend at the Pro Tour. And now to the Magic the Gathering financial world, where some new cards have already started to climb in price. Could this be due to the Pro Tour happening in a few days? Let's take a look at the big movers this week from the new set, March of the Machine. Ren and Realm Breaker. A sudden rebound in price for this card is most likely due to speculation on a potentially powerful 3-mana Planeswalker and from general power creep. You see, as more and more gold-colored legendary bombs get printed, Ren and Realm Breaker's ability to instantly fix your colored mana becomes a bigger and bigger boon, especially in formats like Commander. In older formats, we may see this card really shine, where the -2 ability can power up several broken combos like bringing back Lotus Petal to make infinite mana. Monastery Mentor. Another March of the Machine card also starting to rebound in price this week. The Mentor is another powerful card that was once over $30 for many years due to the play it saw in Legacy and Vintage, but now in its third reprinting, it has dropped down to a low of $3. That said, we see a rise in price this week as its introduction to Magic Arena has many new players brewing with this powerful card and subsequently picking up copies to maybe fill out their physical decks. With Mentor being as powerful as it is, I imagine its price will continue to rise. Welcome to MTG Insider News. What's new in the Magic Multiverse? Let's jump right in and find out. Buckle up everyone, because the biggest news this week is that we have MagicCon Minneapolis featuring Pro Tour March of the Machine starting this Friday, May 5th and running all weekend until May 7th. Now, just under 250 of the top Magic competitors from around the world will be battling each other through 3 rounds of March of the Machine Draft, followed by 4 rounds of Standard Constructed on day 1. The ones who make it to day 2 will be in for another 3 rounds of March of the Machine Draft, with another 4 rounds of Standard Constructed to close out the Swiss portion of the tournament. Any players with 12 wins or better will automatically advance to the top 8 and battle in single elimination Standard Constructed for their shot at a cool $50,000 US first prize. Will we witness another Cinderella story unfold the way it did last time, watching a first-time Pro Tour competitor miraculously make it all the way to the finals of the tournament? Perhaps the talk of the tournament will be a repeat performance from a household Magic name like Reed Duke or Luis Scott Vargas, or even rumored returning Hall of Fame pro Brian Kibler. Find out this weekend and watch it all go down live at twitch.tv/magic. The other big news this week is the mountain of spoilers dropping for March of the Machine Aftermath. Now, this is a bit of an abnormal spoiler season considering the set is an abbreviated version of a regular set, as well as the fact that a random individual spoiled the vast majority of the set already online. That said, many players are still looking forward to examining all the high-res scans of these new cards to see if there's anything that stands out that could maybe shift constructed formats like Standard or even Pioneer, or even just to figure out if there are any spicy singles they need for their Commander decks. We'll have a lot more news for you next week as we cover the results of Pro Tour Minneapolis this weekend, as well as anything else that comes up in the Magic the Gathering world. See you then.